So here I am in Qt Creator, and let's create our first list using arrays. Click on the new project, click on non-Qt project, click on plain C++ application. Give it a meaningful name. I'm going to say my list implementation using arrays. You can change the default path if you want. I'm going to leave it as default. Click next couple of times, and then finally click finish. I'm going to remove the command line arguments because I'm not going to need them for this demo, and remove the C++ cout statement as well. Let me increase the font size so that you can easily see it. Just above the main function, I'm going to create my class. I'm going to call it my list. And then in the private section, I need three things. One is the dynamic array. So I'm going to say int star, I'm going to call it list. The second is a constant, which is going to specify the initial capacity for this array. I'm going to specify 5 for simplicity. And then I'm going to say, what's the current size? I want to keep track of the current size, I mean the number of elements currently stored in the list. So I'm going to declare a variable of type int called size. So these are the data members of my class called my list. And then in the public section, I'm going to give it a default constructor where I need to do some initialization. First, I'm going to create a dynamic array, and the size will be the capacity. So capacity. So what this line does, it's going to create an array on the heap because I'm using the new operator, and it's going to create an array based on this capacity. That means 5. So to store 5 integers, an array will be created on the heap, and the new operator returns an address of the first location that I'm going to store in the list, which is a pointer of type int. And then I'm going to specify the size to be 0. When there is nothing in the list, I'm going to say the size is 0. And after that, so now let's give it an add member function. The return type of that is going to be void because we are not returning anything, but we are inserting an item into the list. I'm going to call it add, and I'm going to specify a parameter of type element, which is going to take an integer when I call this method add on my list object and insert that into the array. So what we can do, how do we specify the index? So I've declared the size, and initially the size is 0. So I can use the same variable to increment the indices. And I'm going to do that by, I'm say list size and assign the value element. So at index 0, because I've initialized size to be 0 in the constructor. So when I create the object from my list class, the size will be 0. And index 0, I would insert the first value. And after that, I'm going to increment the size by 1. So I'm going to say size plus plus and semicolon. So just that we don't need anything, just 2-line member function. And the second, I want to give it a member function called print, that when I call on my list objects is going to print all the values currently stored in the list. So the return type of that is going to be void. That means it doesn't return anything. I'm going to call it print list. And for aesthetics, so that our list displays the values in a form like this, list colon, then the brackets, and then the values, for example, 100, 200, 300. I want to implement my print list method in such a way that it should display the list in this particular form. So for that, I'm going to first cout list colon, then the bracket open, and then semicolon, and I'm going to copy this line and bring it a bit down. And I'm going to say that I'm going to close this now, because when I print all the values, the bracket will be closed. And now inside these two statements, I'm going to iterate over the array and print all the values. So I'm going to use the for loop, and I will initialize a counter variable called counter. Its initial value will be 0. And I'm going to say if counter is less than the size, which indicates the number of elements currently stored. So if my list contains 10 values, for example, in this case, it's going to be less than 5. So let's say if my list contains 3 values, the value of the size will be what? It will be 4, because initially the size was 0. When I insert the first element, size will be incremented by 1. When I increment the second value, the size will be incremented again. So we have to iterate this loop when the size, when the counter is less than the size, not equal to the size. So keep that in mind. And then after that, in the body of the for loop, I'm going to just say cout list counter, and then I'm going to put a space after that. That's it. So when I call this function, what it does is going to first see out on screen this string, and then it's going to display each value of the array, and after every element it's going to put a space, and when it finishes, then I'm going to close the bracket. So I'm going to display the cout the closing curly bracket, and then I want to move the cursor to the next line. So I think that's it for our implementation. Let me just review what I just did. First, I create a class. I call it myList. And in the private section of the class, I've declared 3 data members. The first is called a pointer, which is list, and the type is int. And then I have declared a constant. And this is, by the way, how do you declare a constant in C++? You put the const keyword just in front of the data type. And by convention, it's a good practice to capitalize every letter of the constant variable. It's easy for other programmers to know within no time that it's going to be a constant because the name of this particular variable has been capitalized. And I have assigned the value 5, and then I have declared a variable called size of type end, just to keep track the number of elements currently stored in the size, and I'm also going to be using it as an index value. And then in the constructor, I've initialized the size, and I've created a dynamic array called list, and the number of elements will be based on the capacity, which is 5, and the size is 0. Then I have implemented an add member function, which takes an integer argument. It first does what? It says insert a value at the list of size, that means at index 0, currently size is 0, and then assign the value at that index. So this is the index, this is the element, and then I'm incrementing the size ++ because the next time add will be called, it's going to insert one position and then assign the element to that, and then increment the size by 1. And similarly, the print is going to print all the values, and I'm iterating over the array using the for loop. I'm starting from 0, less than size, counter ++, and then list, counter 0. Object of this particular class that I've created, I'm going to call it list. I'm going to say list.add. I'm going to call the add member function. I'm going to assign the 100 value, and then I'm going to call it again to insert 200, which is the second value at the second index, and then again let's put some values there. And let's we want to display the values of this list. So I'm going to say list print list. That's why I've given it this particular member function. So whenever I want to see the list of values within my list, I'm going to call this function. Let's compile this program and then run it again. This is your first list implemented using arrays. So for example, what if you want to check the underflow and the overflow of my list? What if the list is already full? So I think we have to give this object, myList, another member function, and whose name will be empty and full. So let's implement the empty first. And how do we check if the list is empty? Very simple. The return type of this is going to be Boolean. Yes, because it's going to return true if the list is empty, or it's going to return false. So I'm going to say return size equals 0. If the value of the size is equal to 0, that means there is nothing in the list. Then this particular equality operator will return true, and that true will be returned by this particular member function. You could have implemented this in a naive manner, but I think you already have studied 2 programming languages, so you are good enough now to understand. Otherwise, I could have done something like this: if size equals 0, then return true, else return false. And because these are the single statements, I don't need the curly brackets. So let's check this. So before I add anything to my list, I want to see if the list is empty. So I'm going to say empty, and I'm going to list.empty. It's going to return 1 for true and 0 for false. But I want to see the value true or false if the list is empty. So for that, we have to use something called bool alpha just before calling this function. What it does, that it's going to convert that 0 to false and that one to true. So if the function empty returns 0, that means false, that 0 will be converted by bool alpha to the word false, and if it returns 1, that means true, bool alpha will actually convert that 1 to true. So let's see this. If it returns true, that means our implementation is correct, because I'm calling this particular member function before adding any element to my list. So compile this program and now run this program, and as you can see, the list is empty and it's returning true, because in the beginning it's empty, we didn't add anything before calling this member function. What if we want to see the overflow? And for that we have to first fill in the list. So I'm going to say list.add and let's say 400, and remember that the capacity of my list is 5, as you can see in the private section of the class, and I have to insert one more just to fill this list, and I'm going to say 500, right? So I'm going to go and create another member function. The return type of this is going to be full because it checks the overflow. So I'm again say if the size is equal to capacity, that means return true because the list is full. Because the size is actually the index I am incrementing. Whenever I add an element to the list, I increment the size by 1. So initially it was 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When it comes to 5, it should return true, otherwise it should return false. So I'm going to say else return false. So let's check the overflow after I print the list, and I think it should be full at this very moment because we have already added 5 elements to our list and the capacity of the list is 5. So let's give it a try. So see out, and I'm going to say full colon bool alpha. We want to see the word true and false, and list.full and endl. So save changes, compile the program, and let's run the program to see the output. And as you can see, in the beginning the list was empty, it was true, then we inserted 5 elements into the list using the print list member function, and then finally when we say list.full, it says it's true that the list is full. So here is a gotcha, and that is that our implementation of the list has this problem that if we specify the size to be 5, it remains 5 throughout the entire life of the program. What if we want to insert more elements here? And can we do this to dynamically increase the size of this list? Yes, we can, and that is the implementation of vector in standard template library, and we're going to see that in the next couple of lectures. Thanks for watching. See you next time.